Let's get a caption. So, welcome to CIS41A. I think I met most of you. Most of you were in my classes before, but if you haven't taken my class, you're going to have a good time in 41A. This is more of an advanced security class. It's going to help you prepare for CISA certification. We do have vouchers for you to take certification. It is a little bit harder than the security class, but it is highly demanded. So if you are looking for a cybersecurity specialist position, when you look at the requirements, a lot of the time now they want 2 certs. They don't want security class mostly anymore as much. Even at entry level, they want you to have analysis skills. So this is going to give you an overview of 27, which is the security class course. And then it's going to give you a little bit more in quantitative, qualitative risk analysis and risk management. It's going to teach you how to operate as an analyst for the field. This is an area that most people work in when they work in cybersecurity. So it's highly demanded for the certification. So next, I'm going to go over our syllabus, and you can find the syllabus in your Canvas course room. If you don't have access to it yet because you're still trying to add the course, you'll be able to see this on Canvas, or I can send that to you or give it to you later today. So as we mentioned, that this is the cybersecurity analysis course, and it focuses on the principle and the practices. And it is a 3-credit course. It's going to help you prepare for the CISA certifications. We are going to have lecture hours along with lab. I tried to address that while you're here. If you don't finish, you can, take it home and do it at home additionally if you want. There will be times that you are going to be required to do some remote work because this is a hybrid course. I like to do hybrid course because it's freeing up your schedule to take other classes or to work or to do apprenticeship, along with, making your time count when you're here. So that's kind of important, just to make it feasible for you and for the instructor, which is me. Okay, so we are going to meet in here every Wednesday, starting at 5:20. The class ends at 8:30. If you finish earlier with the lab exercises and such, you're welcome to get up and go. I just need to take attendance prior to that. I apologize for the back row not being able to have access, so we'll be able to get that clear hopefully by the end of the week or by Monday. So we're going to talk a little bit about the content of the course. Any questions so far? We're going to focus on threat management. Today, we're going to talk about insider threat, whether intentional or external threats, how that's coming in. A lot of times when we look at how things are being attacked, we normally think about how people or attackers or entity that's coming in from the outside, right? So we'll talk about the perimeter and how we would be able to protect. Sorry. There should be some access, but there's not. So is there no extra chairs?
There's one right here.
There's a seat right here if we want to do that. Okay, so we're gonna look at security analysis as far as risk. We're gonna focus on endpoints and network, and it is crucial. I can't emphasize this enough, right? That you understand and know networking well. So if you haven't taken 40A, make sure you do that. Make sure you prepare for your network certification. It doesn't hurt. If you want to take CCNA course at RCC, that's also going to help as well. So the Cisco courses is going to also be handy. So cybersecurity, a lot of it is going to be networking. So there's, I think, an extra chair in the back if you like. And we are going to do a little bit of pen test technique in recon. We spend a lot of time in reconnaissance because when you do reconnaissance, you're gonna actually see vulnerabilities and threats and things like that, that is jeopardizing your network, okay? So that means that we are gonna look at things that are passing through. We're gonna do some intelligence gathering, correlations. I spend a lot of time getting you introduced or be familiar with Kali. Kali is a common tool for practice. You're welcome to use Hackbox or any other tools of your choice. It's always good to have exposure to different tools. There will be times that you're gonna run into problems if things don't work because packages change, and we will try to troubleshoot it and overcome that. But that's the nature of the game, right? Everything is always changing so quickly. We're gonna look at, we're gonna use packet analysis tools like Wireshark. We're familiar with some of this from the prior class. If not, we'll introduce you to that. We'll talk about intrusion detection and how we'll be able to use information and data to protect our systems. And then we'll get into data classifications, looking at assets, looking at systems and network, and how we will be to implement rules and policies that's going to be able to protect our systems. Okay. And if you're having issues, if we're having issues with seats, I already talked to admin yesterday, so hopefully they're going to add more desks and chairs. And so we'll fix some of the problems so everybody should be able to fit. But if you find an empty seat, please take it. Then we'll talk about architecture and helping you understand a little bit about tools. So I mentioned this before to many of you. This field is about knowing your tools and when to use it effectively, right? There are many, many different tools of choice in the industry, open source or proprietary. The resourceful analyst is going to be a successful analyst, in my opinion. So there are times that you're going to be using scripting tools. There are times that you're going to be using automated tools. So they're, understanding how to use a tool and when to use the tools is really important. We'll take a look specifically starting today with firewalls and the type of firewalls. These are appliances and it could be software as well. They act as protection for your network and systems. And then we'll get a little bit into forensic. I think some of you have taken my CIS41A, where we focus a lot of, procedures and techniques on how to investigate after the incident happens. So when you're applying for a job, you're going to see commonly incident response first thing on the list, right? For cybersecurity. You are going to become firefighter of the IT world, so we are going to put out problems, and that's our job. This job is highly demanded because problems occurs all the time. As you know, that it's not a matter of if they're going to attack, it's a matter of when they're going to attack, even with generative AI. And I'm sure you heard a lot of news about that recently, right? Generative AI is now being used as a tool for attacks, so we have to be, we have to update ourselves with some of the existing tools and how that can be used and to combat it. So when you go through this course, these are the things that you're going to be able to fulfill. You're going to be able to demonstrate that you can analyze threats and the mechanism and build mechanism to defend your system and network. You're going to be able to manage vulnerability, and then to have security measures for your network environment. We're going to align network policies. Those are the rules that we would implement, and procedures. Those are the steps that we follow for the rules, and be able to build plan for security. And then we'll be able to perform monitoring analysis along with investigation through forensic or live analysis. And that way we would be able to understand how we can secure the system. So if you do your homework, you're going to be able to have the proper solutions. There's no 100% foolproof solutions, in my opinion. If you're looking at two security firms, they're going to deliver slightly different solutions. But overall, understanding the major needs, the priority in your problem is going to be important when you're going through the analysis steps. Okay? Any questions? Okay, so these are the requirements entering the class. I know that you fulfill that through the other courses like CIS 25, which is your basic hardware and software, and then CIS 27, which is the foundational for the security or network security course. I recommend this book, the study guide. We're not required to get the text. I will provide you with the notes that I condense from books and resources. So if you want to use this book to study, it does have practice questions and things that you can use. But there are many ways. We are going to have access to test out. And I mainly use test out for things like, if you want to go back and repractice or do labs on your own, that's good. In my opinion, I'm a very visual, tactile learner. When I went through school, that's how I learned a lot of things like computers, networking, and even security. Even now, when I do something, I have to break it down and do it. Sometimes I will break it and then I will have to find a way to fix it. So I like to deliver the same approach to you. So that means that, clicking through, watching a video and click, if that's helpful for you, you can use it on your own time. But when we're in class, we're going to do activities together. So that way I can help you and it will not be on test out. Test out will be used for practice exam and things like that towards the end. So I will give you access to that via email. Okay, let's talk about assignments and gradings. I do take late work. I do have a closeout date at the end where I don't take late work. Assignments usually close after a month or so. So make sure that you keep up because if you fall behind, it's really hard to catch up. The labs, the assignments are not really sequential, but it builds on foundational knowledge. So sometimes students would feel like, oh, they can't do lab 4 without doing lab 3. It doesn't work that way. You can still do lab 4 and then go back and do lab 3 if you missed it. However, right, try to keep up with the assignments. If you're finished at the end of class, you can submit it. I will try to grade it by the following week so that way you will have your updated grade. You're required to have class assignments, and then we're going to do practice exam. This is going to help you prepare for the certification. I usually open this for about 6 weeks, but for some reason, most of my students always wait till the last week, which is finals week, and then they try to get it all done. And that can be very challenging. So make sure that when you have access to the practice exam, do it earlier. Try to do it over time so you can get comfortable with the exam itself. CompTIA bought out Test Out, so their exam is very close to the practice exam. So that's helpful. That's why we pay a lot for the Test Out package, along with buying the voucher for the CompTIA for apprenticeship students. Okay. We will have a couple of quizzes and a final exam. It's going to be on Canvas, multiple choice. The quizzes, you have 3 attempts. The highest score will be recorded. I will try to do some quiz review game and I will share that on Canvas. Quizzes are due at the end of the week. Okay. Extra credit will have some opportunity with that through the review game and other extracurricular activity. I actually am coaching for California Mayor's Cup. I'm looking for 5 people to play. If you're interested in competing, we might be able to win. We're going to compete against 19 other colleges. So, and when we competed before for Mayor's Cup, NBC usually ranked first or second. Sometimes we'll rank after RCC because they're just a stronger team or they are a bigger team. So I like to take the win this year. If you're interested, even if you never competed before, let me know. I will put you on the roster and then we'll get you access to the practice platform and then you can prepare for the competition. And so, well, I'll think about giving some extra credit for the students that are participating, and then we'll get you some rewards for participation as well. For grading, so here is your category. We'll have quizzes, 10% of your grade. Assignments and participation, that will include the classwork that we're going to be doing. That's 35% of your grade. Your lab exercises will be 20% of your grade. There's approximately 12 labs or so. So it's going to break down to the percentage, and that will be 20%. your practice exam is gonna be 15% of your grade, and your final exam is 20% of your grade. So that will total 100% for your overall. And your grade scale is right above, there's no pluses or minus. I follow the college code of conduct. So if there's any kind of issues, right, let's address it. You can talk to me about it. We can talk to the admin about it. But make sure that we address it. If you are absent from class a couple of times and if I don't hear from you, I do reserve the right to drop the student. I usually don't do that, but you know, if I don't hear from you for a while, then I will be able to go into the system and submit that. But if you wish to drop, make sure that you look at the deadline. Otherwise, you know, that impacts your completion percentage if you get a W, and also your financial aid. So be mindful of that. And then if we have any kind of issues in the behavior area or conduct, right, that can be addressed. We can also talk to the Dean of Academic Affairs and so on if the problem is a big problem. So do your own work. I know that AI is very useful. It's definitely a good study buddy. You know, I learn from AI sometimes, right? Like when I ask it a question, it's gonna give me, because sometimes like when I write a lab, I would tell AI to look at it and give me some feedback, and it's gonna tell me, oh, you know, this is good, because the reasoning behind AI now is pretty good. So I don't mind if you're using AI, but for most part, right, try to do your own work. Get the knowledge that you need so that way you can practice in the field, and that's important. Okay, so in the case of cheating, this will result in a 0 and also dismissal from the class. We do file procedural for administrative, you know, meetings and so on. Are there enough chairs in the back? I think I have to open 2 sections of 41A in the future semester. And then if you need accessibility accommodation, here's some information. You can visit the ARC. They will send me a letter, and that's gonna allow me to accommodate your needs. And then if you have, you know, additional requirements, they also have resources. I gave them some monitor yesterday that allows the student to be able to see clear. You know, it's a monitor that's designed for low visibility needs. So making sure that you use the resources. Here's my information. My email is probably, I respond pretty quickly. If I see the email, I usually promptly respond, or within the 24 hours. So if I'm sleeping, I might not be able to get to it until I get up. But if you message me on Canvas, I also respond via our email system. I cannot hold office hours in here before this class anymore because there's another class in here. So if you need help or have questions, I'm over at the Makerspace, which is Science Technology first floor. When you walk in, turn left, and next to the wood lab is my office. So it's room 100E. And then you can also join the Zoom meeting. So Monday and Wednesday, 3:30 to 5, and then Tuesday I have virtual only. I'm on campus for meetings sometimes, but because for my online class, they want to meet online. So 4:30. And then on Thursday, I am here before my class. I do have a class tomorrow at 5:20. Some of you are in it for ethical hacking. And then if you want to make an appointment because this doesn't work for you, send me an email. Any question? Okay, so let's get to it, right? If you need USB to store your work, there's some up here. You can grab one. It's yours to keep. Okay, so let's talk about where can I get all of these documents. Your documents is found in the module here. You can find the notes that you need for your assignments and quizzes. They're here. I normally post lab videos and lecture videos, right?
And then assignments, questions. So you can click on it. So we're gonna download this file now. We're gonna go over it and then we will correlate that with the notes document. Okay, so so as we go through this, you can refer to the notes to answer the question. Okay, so unit 1, we're gonna start with a lot of the review concepts. I think we've talked about this all the time, right? It's funny because I've been to interviews, so when I interview some of the people and I ask them, you know, can you describe to me your role in CIA? And some of them don't remember or know what CIA is, right? So we want to make sure that you remember, right, the triad or the CIA, what it is. So in the cybersecurity world, we operate under CIA. We're going to do everything to make sure that we provide confidentiality. This is really important now where we, so you guys probably heard about the issues with IRS, right? There's issues about data being, required to be given from the IRS to a certain entity. For examining per the president. And then there's privacy issues because there are personal information about individuals, their families, their income, their household information, all of that, right? So, and that create a lot of the internal discussions about how we can better protect data and how, are there rules and regulations to be able to protect the privacy for us in the nation and also through the state or it with the certain company and so on. So confidentiality, who knows what that really means? So if I want confidentiality, what do I need? How can I have, I'm sorry? Encryption. So what makes encryption result in confidentiality? So if I encrypt data, how is that going to give me confidentiality? Only the person who has the key can see, correct? So that means that it's confidential and it's per view. So it's only for the people that's intended. What about integrity? Can encryption give me integrity? Integrity means what? It hasn't been modified, correct? So if I give you a set of data, let's say tax information about United States federal employees, right? You expect that data to be intact, not modified. So to make sure that it has integrity, we want to make sure that the data hasn't been jeopardized or modified in one way or another, right? Okay. So let's go through and answer some of the questions. So in the first question, it says, what is the responsibility of the cybersecurity analyst? What type of knowledge and skills are required for this role? Right? Pretty straightforward. So as an analyst, you are responsible for confidentiality, the protection of confidentiality, the protection of integrity, and making sure that things are available to access. So we want to make sure we deliver CIA. And that just means it's for all security professionals. That's a lot of the things that we do is going to fall into these three categories. Sometimes combined or sometimes separate. Most of the things we do are going to be in confidentiality and integrity. If you have proper protective measure, you're going to have availability. Your system's going to be available, right? Your system's going to have the proper resources for the users or for the people who wants to access it. So as an analyst, you need to have a strong understanding, a thorough understanding of your threat environment. What is the existing threats in your network or in your company? It could be people. And then with that, you're gonna determine the level of threats, right? So some threats are priority threats and some threats are low priority. So we want to make sure we address the threats or respond to it. So that means that we have to start categorizing the risk. Okay. And there are risks all the time. We take risks when we drive to work, right? We take risks when we go for a walk outside. At the same thing in organization, there are risks. So for example, having solutions, implementing solutions like upgrading software, there's risks. It's definitely improving maybe productivity for the user or for the employee, but the software might have design flaws that can generate some risk. Okay. We need to make sure that we know the different type of potential attacks or existing attacks that's happening to the organization. Okay. So attacks could be web-based attacks, right? Attack could be physical attack. So there's logical attack and there's physical attack. What's the difference? If I'm saying that there's logical attack, that can be happening where? Yes. From the network or on the systems, could be from, a lot of times we say web because that's probably the easiest entrance, right? The easiest point or target for attack. A lot of things that they can do to a web server is to denial of service is probably the most common thing that you're going to see, right? But your web server is going to tie to the database server. It might be in the DMZ area. It might be tied to other things, but in order to get into your network from the internet, which is the web base, it has to go through what? The firewall, right? Your protection in the perimeter. Okay. So we have to take a look at the security controls. What type of firewall rules that we're setting that's going to help us protect our network systems, right? We can also set firewall rules for behavioral, like users' activity, right? Applications, access, everything is, if you're looking at your mobile app, it's all web app. I was talking to my husband the other day and he's trying to build an app and I asked him, would this mean that he would want to implement, web-based cloud storage and so on? And he said the cost of it is so high. But then, and then you have to take a look at the security measure against that, right? Because if you have private data that's being passed from the endpoint devices, like mobile devices, to a certain type of server, we have to take a look at how the server is protecting your data. And then the means in between on the communication security. Okay. So for the second question, it says, what is the commitment for the cybersecurity analyst? So if you look at the first page in the second section, it talks about defense in depth. And you hear this a lot, right? We say this a lot in all the security classes. What does it mean? So your solution is going to be a laundry list. It's going to be overlapping. It's going to be a lot of different things, different areas, from user training to, network protection and system security appliances and the rules that we set, checking for protocols that we use, updating our system. So you're going to have a lot of different things to address to be able to make sure that you have a defense in depth. We don't just focus in one area. So if you have a security solution, just focus on the network, then you're going to fall down in like application security, user security, physical security, right? Like the building, someone can enter your door and steal your physical server or, sabotage it, break it, right? So that means that we're gonna have overlapping security controls to be able to uh, um, achieve your goals or your objectives of your security. Okay. So when you get an interview question, they ask you, can you explain to me what defense in depth means, right? You're gonna spend more than a couple minutes to explain. You're gonna tell them that defense in depth means that you're gonna have overlapping solutions, right, in different areas such as, and you would go into the details. Any question? Okay, so this is very much a review for many of you, right? We talked about this in many classes before. So you can find all of that information here. It talks about CIA and the areas of confidentiality, the integrity and availability. And when I created these notes, I kind of want to kind of give it an area where you can take a look at from an attacker standpoint, right? When you're looking at the confidentiality, the attacker objective is to go in as an unauthorized entity, right, to the system. And so, and it's gonna, they want to modify the information so that way the data is no longer having integrity. So that's their objective. So your objective is the opposite, right? Knowing that they are going to really target certain area, that's how you're gonna be able to attack. And then the availability, the goal for the attackers to disruption, cripple your system, cripple the access, right? And a lot of times, if you're looking at like the heightened point in usage, so for example, first week of spring, when everybody comes back to school, right? And if the system is down, if it's unavailable, guess what happens, right? If this is a business, you are gonna lose a lot of customer because if you have a grand opening the first day where you have sales and you know you got your people to be able to make money, and your web server is down, your e-commerce server is down, guess what happens? Your customer is gonna go elsewhere, right? So we want to make sure that we have things that are available, and that's really important. So that really addressed the availability area. Okay. So a lot of people kind of lump privacy with, you know, some of the security area. It does fall into the subcategory. But it's really a way that we need to take a look at share information. So I'm writing a data ethic course. This is now required at the university because, you know, everything that we have access is pertaining to data, and technology ethics is really important, especially when you're looking at AI, because you can tell AI to pull a lot of different things and it's going to gather all the data and give that to you. So we have to take a look at the privacy and how that the information is being shared across. Some information are public information, but some information that's private information that's leaked, right? Now, it's really important, and I'm going to address this here, and I hope that you remember, in this profession, it's very important that you follow ethics. There are times that you are going to be asked or be privileged to see or access resources beyond your scope. Okay? Only do what's in the contract. That means that if they have you access a certain system, focus on that. Even if you know that you can access other systems and look at other systems. Because beyond your means is going to cause a problem. And when you violate ethics, right, it's about reputation. So that can also ruin your profession very quickly. So it means that we can have access to, this is why a lot of the times they require clearance. Okay, so personal identifiable information is privileged to a lot of these type of professions, and we want to make sure that we protect PII. Okay, so the general practices here, and then they might require you to sign non-disclosure agreement, right? And when we disclose, that means that we're permitted to disclose. Okay. Okay, so let's review a lot of this. So if you took Security Plus, they focus a lot on this, right? What is vulnerability, right? The area and the type of vulnerability. So in ethical hacking and risk assessment, when you see that on a job, a lot of the times you assess vulnerability. We're looking at weaknesses using tools, looking at operating system weaknesses. That's a big area for Microsoft, right? Updates, even when they push security updates, there's still more updates to come. So weaknesses in software, weaknesses in devices. So another big area right now, when you're looking at industrial automation with all the AI and the robotic type of systems that's being integrated for industrial automation, you're seeing IoT and devices that are connecting that is being jeopardized, and firmware is a big problem. And that requires reverse engineering knowledge and understanding coding and being able to looking at software engineering and computer engineering. So looking at the weaknesses overall beyond just the network and the applications that we see, some of the systems that we see now is pertaining to AI and automation, looking at their weaknesses, okay? So the threat. This could be a source that exploit or jeopardize or cause damage based on the vulnerability. So vulnerability is going to lead us into identifying the type of threats there are, okay? So when I am scanning for vulnerability on my web server, it's going to give me a list. And based on that list, right, it could be protocol usage, right? It could be port. I'm using port 80 instead of 443 for my web. So I would have to look at that and say, potentially I would have threats, right, that would come in through that port. So what can I do? I can look at how I can implement firewall rules to be able to block or prevent somebody from entering from that port. Now, to quantify, we're going to look at risk is going to be threat times vulnerability. Okay, this is the formula. And you can quantify this based on level or percentage. Okay, we'll come back to this in another chapter later on, and I will make you do, go through the matrix to be able to better understand it. Okay, so for number 3, it says, what type of control can be implemented for CIA? What can I do to make sure that I have proper control? So these are just a few examples, right? They're not all the controls that you see. So confidentiality, we can have firewall, and there are different types of firewall. We can look at a stateful firewall, looking at network state. We can have packet filtering firewall. We can have application firewall. So in general, firewall is going to check against whatever that you set as a rule to allow or deny. Okay. And with that, you're going to see access control list. And access control list pertains to what's permitted and what's not. So if you right-click your file and you go to its property, you see ACLs, right? Who has the permission to access your file? But on your router at home, because it functions also as a firewall, you see access control list, right? Which device is allowed to connect to it? How you can block other devices from connecting to your wireless router and connecting to the rest of your network. And then earlier, Benjamin said encryption, right? Encryption is such a broader term, right? We use encryption for a lot of things. When you're using a website, HTTPS, you're using encryption. And that is stream-based encryption, so it's doing bit by bit. So when you're authenticated to your bank account, to be able to look at, your transactions, you're using encryption, right? But then we can also do file encryption or drive encryption, like using BitLocker for storage encryption. We can protect the file. So let's say that you have confidential design or you work for the government where they have, engineering design that is required high protection, right? Maybe military tanks or airplanes or, weapons, right? Then they would require encryption. And normally when we look at that, we would use PKI, so public key infrastructure, right? Or like RSA or something better in strength as far as how key is used. So when you're using shared key, your chance of the key is being jeopardized because it's easier to get the key, right, than to break the encryption, because that just take a lot of resources and processing power. So if you're using public and private key, that's probably better. Right? One key to lock, the other key to open. Right? And not always the same, but if you're using a shared key, what's happened is like how you lock your door. When I lock my door, I have the same key. In order to allow you into my house, I have to give you that key, right? It's the same concept. So depending on the type of encryption. So encryption doesn't give you 100%, but then you guys also hear about blockchain, right? Blockchain is big with cryptocurrency now, right? Blockchain's been broken. There's not, so when people say, oh, this is the best security technology ever, right? That's loose, right? It's a loosely term. I don't really believe that. It's usually when they say that, it's because they want to sell you something that's not perfect, okay? So it's all about having the processing power and time. But with generative AI now, right, that level of the work, I don't have to have, a bunch of people being able to use the tool and targeting the system any longer. I can use AI to be able to do the work, right? Once AI is committed to something, it's going to be good at it. It's like you training a soldier, right? You're giving it the proper tools and it's going to hone, its skills. So the more data you give AI, the better it's going to be. And that's how they train their. And so the attacker, they're going to have their ML model too, right? So we have to understand that if they're going to have the ML model, how are we going to be able to combat that? How are we going to be able to detect that? And so if they're able to pull bots to be able to automate the attack, how, that doesn't always mean, and AI APIs is a one area. I'm sure you've heard all over the news, right? Okay, any questions? Okay, so we talked about 3 for 4. The regulatory standards that is required for what type of information, personal identifiable information, but it's really important that you think about geographically the requirements for that organization. So if it's in the UK or in Europe, they do have additional requirements, right? That's different than North America and the United States. So here we protect private data, private personal identifiable information. Like now, since after 1970s, Social Security number becomes a PII, right? If you're looking at your grandparents' Social Security card, it says that this is not used for identification, right? But after 1970s, right, in the 80s, we transitioned to use Social Security to identify the individual. So that pertains to your tax. It pertains to, a lot of your government-based information, your retirement, right? And all of those things. Your driver license number, right, could be your health information. So that will be unique to the individual, that's identifiable to that individual. Now, for 5, it asks you to explain the difference between vulnerability and threats. And you need to provide some example. And here are my example. You can add to it. So we talked about vulnerability as weaknesses of a system, a device, a network, right? A process that could be. So a process could be like this. Let's say that my company
contracted with the government and we design military weapons, right? But I don't really have a good physical protection of the people entering and leaving the building. Or people submitting files and protect the files. So the fall down in that process is someone can also enter and pretend to be one of the engineers. Take the file, right, the engineering file, and leak that to another government or, someone who's willing to pay for it, right? So you guys know what that term is called? Think, sponsor. So those are normally sponsored by a government or an organization, right, to be able to take the data and leak it.
And so when you have vulnerability, the attacker is gonna find that vulnerability and capitalize on it. So if I know that at 5 o'clock, right, the door is wide open and people can come in and out in that facility that's supposed to be highly secured, right? I'm gonna come in at that time and I'm gonna be able to go in and take what I need and leave, okay? And so some examples could also be unpatched system and firmware, and you see this with a lot of automated system, also on your surveillance camera, or smart TV, smart refrigerator, thermostat that you see, the firmware is the big issue, right? And so to maintain it, the manufacturer has to be able to look at, right, the flaws in the software and the hardware itself and be able to fix the problem. So you will see unpatched system, firmware, software, or even in the physical area where open server room or highly sensitive physical area, or untrained user, right? People giving out sensitive information. And you know that social engineering tactics is, they change all the time. Now you got people calling and pretending to be police officer, right? They're trying to get your information. And they can do that in an organization too. They can pretend to be not just technical support, but they can also pretend to be like a colleague or something else. And because of AI, what can they do? They can mask the voice, right? I think if you attended the session with FBI when they have the cybersecurity summit, how long does it take for a voice? How long is a voice clip in order for them to mask the voice? How long do you think? About 30 seconds, right? So if they can get you to say something for about a minute, that's good enough to be able to match your voice. It's amazing, right? They have AI, and you can do this, right? You can find it online, and you can. There are tools to do that. They can also match your face, right? It's not abundant here because they do control a lot of it, but I think you hear in some cases where people call, right? They're starting to call and they will pretend to be someone else, that not the individual, right? But the face, everything looks different. And, they would do the voice call and you see the video call. They would ask for money. Once the money's transferred, they disconnect the number, right? No longer accepting calls and so on. So you see a lot of the areas and so we have to take a look at how the users are responding to this. Right? That means that we have to have training. Okay. So threat is a source that's going to exploit on the vulnerability to cause damage or disruption. And that could be an attacker, an employee, a malware. So how do they relate to risk? So as an analyst, you have to know the difference between these, right? That's why we spend a lot of time to differentiate what's a vulnerability, what's a threat, and what is a risk. So a risk is the possibility that the threat might exploit the vulnerability. Okay. Sometimes this is a high risk. In our world, we address the high priority risk. Okay? And then we go down the list for the low priority risks. You still have to address it, but you address those things first. So the incident response people, high risk. All the time you look at that, right? It's all about preventative, I think, how you would be able to deliver the solutions, but that's ideal, right? Preventative security costs a lot of money, for business to maintain, especially if you have very large corporations. You might have internal teams, and then you also have external people, contractor, consultant, auditors that come in and take a look at your solutions, or hire security firms to do that. Any questions? Okay, so that's on the notes, as you can see there. Okay, so how can you assess threat? Okay. To assess your threat, first, you need to identify its source and event. So how can I look at that? Logs, right? That's the world that we live in, logs. Event viewer in Windows, right? For your log files, it could be Apache on Linux servers, which is very, very common in web servers, very common, right? Because I always get the question when I teach programming online, especially with Java class, and we're like, why do we have to run it in command line, right? The majority of the time, if you do the back end administration, everything is in command line, and that's gonna go for you guys too. So when you are assessing Linux servers and servers that don't have graphical user interface, even Windows server, you only can have command prompt. We want to be able to make sure that we know how to use command prompt and PowerShell properly. Okay. So we can examine the logs that examine the events. So events that's already happened. Right? This is gonna give you, so this is historical. That means that you're doing reactive security. But if, let's say that you have a new company who doesn't really have any kind of security solution, you have to take a look at what's going on now to really determine, right, is there potential issues or existing issues now and potential problems down the line. So you have to build that data. Two, we can determine the vulnerabilities and where the positions, where they are, right? Based on what we can find first. Okay, so first you look at logs, right? Then you do vulnerability assessment. So who remembers what kind of tools or system you can use for vulnerability assessment? Done it many times. You're gonna do it again today. I'm gonna make sure you do it until you remember. So if okay, I'm sorry. Okay, you can use a virtual machine, but we can use virtual machine for so what kind of application you can use? What kind of, where can I go and find these applications? You guys heard Nmap? So Nmap does what? So if I'm looking at network vulnerabilities, Nmap is going to give you open ports, right? What's being opened? Because it's kind of like how you left your door windows open. You might forget that it was open, right? Let's say that you have a mansion and you have 100 doors and windows. And you might open many of them and you don't remember, right? And in the network, it's like that. We might have services that use many different ports. And we want to be able to scan it and determine, oh, these are the open ports. Go down the list. This is what we use. Well, this is what we don't use. What we don't use, we disable. Okay. So Nmap is one of them. Nessus is another one. I think Nessus proprietary software. There is a home version that's free. Nessus does an inventory of all your endpoint devices, all your connected devices, and then it assesses those, right? So the scan takes a long time. So those are some of the tools that we probably see. We'll use more tools in this class. Then based on that, you're gonna have a list of vulnerabilities, right? Maybe software or hardware systems. Then you're gonna go down that list and you're gonna determine how often this occurs, right? So how can I determine that? Look at your events. Let's say that you have wireless network area that you often see vulnerabilities, and it happens a lot. You can also use Wireshark to scan your network, right? You can build your data, so determine how likely, how often is that going to happen. Then the magnitude of impact. Is it going to be that it's going to be highly impacted? Let's see. You need a chair? And what type of impact we're going to see, right? We're going to take a look at is there a direct impact to the system, the people, and so on. And then after that, we're going to be able to determine the risk. So you're going to start with looking for vulnerability, how likelihood that's going to occur, right? What is it going to impact and the level of impact, and then determine the risk. And that's the world of an analyst. Understand? Those are the things that you do. So cybersecurity is such a buzzword, right? Everybody wants to get in it because it's glamorous, right? So just know that you are going to look at logs. Sometimes it could be very boring. You go through thousands of files. But when you find something, it's rewarding and interesting, right? Okay. So based on this, right, there is a section where it talks about the 4 categories of threats. They break it down to 4 areas. Adversarial threats, those are intentional threats. They aim for a target to undermine that target. For example, like a disgruntled employee. And they know that we might not even check what kind of data that they would delete or change until later on. So they would go in and delete the data. Now, if I have a proper system in place, for example, if a certain type of data is encrypted, right? They cannot just go in and delete the data. And even if they attempt it, it should notify me, right? So and so, or if I have proper permission control, they should not be able to access it. But when you have high level employee, so for example, like an executive, and they did not get a promotion or whatever that they wanted, right? They do have higher privilege in system access and also permissions in different type of files and storage. But we need to monitor that, right? So we need to make sure that all system logs information, who accessed what, and it's going to give you all of that information in events. Then you have accidental threats. Somebody mistakenly perform a certain action. So for example, they accidentally sent out a sensitive file to a group email, right? And that email goes to the external entity. We need to make sure that we map it, right? So when you have a data leak, you have to follow the data. There are sources and tools to be able to do that. A lot of times data is being passed through downloads, right? Emails, or sometimes physical storage, but a lot of times it's through the networks. So we'll be able to see where that data goes. You guys ever see those advertisements and it tells you pay $9.99 to check your credit and see if you have leak information? You have a free open source tool to do that, right? I've been feeling. Let's use that website. If you put your email address in, you will see if you're on the dark web, but they charge for that. And then they also said, well, we can give you all your personal identifiable information where it went. So it just mapped the data based on your identity. There's open source tool for that too. So people would take advantage of that service if they don't know how. But in the case that if you have data leak in your organization, you have to go and follow that and see where it goes. And you have to see how you're gonna be able to contain it. Okay, because when we recall the email, right, when you recall the email, even when they click open already, recall fails. They already downloaded the file and that file could go to another person or another system, right? And then in some cases, you have untrained user clicking on a phishing link. You have structural threat. That means that your control fails due to system exhaustion or resource exhaustion. Like if you don't have proper amount of RAM for your server, or even sometimes it's not cooled properly, where it's too hot. So we have to take a look at how we can better maintain the resources that we have. That's gonna give us availability and it's also gonna reduce, right? We can't say 100% that it's gonna remove it, depending on the implementation of the solution, but it's gonna reduce it. Then we have environmental threat. That means that it is man-made disasters, and you see this with bomb threats for physical security. Or sometimes you also have natural occurrences like storms, fire. In this area, we have earthquake and fire. So depending on where you're located geographically, you have to assess based on that. And then rarely you have like, you know, sometimes they would say, oh, you know, this particular area, they have tsunami every 100 years, right? And then, you know, you gotta take a look at historical data on when that happens. I just went over this last semester with my CIS41D, which is advanced security. It's after this class. And we talked about like looking at historical data. So if you're looking at like Los Angeles in one area and that area only had fire once in a while, and then you have an outlier of some kind that people can, you know, they can torch something. But you know, you would have to have a prediction. And with AI modeling now, you'd be able to do that. Pull all the data for like 200 years, and then you're gonna take a look at how likely earthquake's gonna happen here. How likely is fire is gonna happen here. How likely is property theft is gonna happen here. So you can control a lot of the physical security area and also reduce this area, right? Using the proper technology in your hands now. It's free too, right? Okay, so let's kind of go through this matrix real quick. In master program for cybersecurity, this is the area that we focus on a lot, only because IT managers and security managers, this is what they do, right? They sit there all day and, you know, decide on a solution that's appropriate based on what's given by the analyst. So as an analyst, you create this and then you move it out to the management level, and then they sit there and they look at it and they would say, okay, well, this is feasible, this is cost feasible, we're gonna go with this, okay? So the question says, ABC company conducts cybersecurity training for employees 3 times a year. That's more than often, right? The requirement is at least once a year for most. Regulation, most companies would do it twice a year, so they're doing it 3 times a year. Focusing on malware, phishing, password protection. Those are the 3 things. Each employee is required to complete a training once a year. They do it 3 times a year, but the employees is only required to do it once a year. So we know that they already have training. They should go to the training. And normally when the company conducts it, after you finish a training, you have a certificate and that records go into HR file. There have been 2 incidents per year over the last 5 years. Okay. That's pertaining to this area. Okay. And the incidents are listed below. So we're going to use the table. Remember that first we need to identify, right, the vulnerability. Then we're going to look at the likelihood of how often it's going to occur. and then we're gonna look at the risk. So first, we're gonna look at the risk, okay? So phishing exposing sensitive data, very, very common in most places, right? But based on the likelihood of occurrences for this company, we're gonna put low. That means that the impact is gonna be low. Why is it low? Well, we do training 3 times a year. They're required to have one at least once a year, right? But we had 2 incidents, not specifically in the phishing area. We just have 2 incidents that's pertaining to the user a year, right? So that's gonna be considered low. Then you have malware corrupting data system. So this arbitrary, we're saying, okay, maybe this company allows a lot of downloads, there's a lot of web access, maybe they don't filter unsecure website and so on, right? But the user, as they already been trained, they should not be just visiting any kind of website anyway, okay? So we can classify that as medium, and the impact is medium. Now, for the user giving out password, if our training is effective, right, that should be low for occurrence, and the impact is going to be low. We do have cases where you're going to have occurrence that's low and the impact is medium. It depends on what system is impact or the group of people it's impact. You're going to take a look at how, like, the subject, and the object in that particular scenario. So in general, like, normally you have correlation like this. Okay. So when you do a likelihood matrix, it's going to look like this. You can just use a table. You can use Excel spreadsheet, right? You're going to be able to derive that. So what you're going to do is first you identify your risks. You go down, you just type down all the risks, right? And how do I know the risk? I look at the vulnerability that exists that can generate that risk. So, it's going to be longer than 3, of course. And then I have a column and I would classify based on the risk, right? Low, medium, high, etc. I sort it, the high, I need to make sure that I address that first. And then I have a third column, I'm going to specify the impact. So can you do this? You can impress employers. I know how to do risk assessment. I know how to be able to, identify the risk, right? Look at the impact level. You have to throw out the right proper returns. Okay, so looking at number 9, we are going to look at the outcomes and explain how ABC company would accept, avoid, or mitigate the risk. Okay, so if I accept the risk, that just means that whatever happens, happens. There's nothing we can do about it, right? You hear that a lot at home. There's nothing we can do about it. I just accept the risk. It's kind of like, the accidents happen, right, on the freeway, but you are going to take the risk to drive on the freeway, right? You accept that risk. Now, you can avoid the risk. So if you know the accident is going to happen on the freeway all the time, you can avoid the risk by taking inside streets, not taking the freeway, right? We can avoid it, or walk, ride a bicycle, right? Not drive, stay home, right? That means avoidance. Then we can mitigate the risk, okay? And in here, there are many things that we can do. We can remove the cost of the threat, right? Technically, that's how you mitigate the risk, is to remove the vulnerability and the threat. Because remember the formula, threat combined with vulnerability, you're going to have risk. If you want to remove the risk, remove the vulnerability, remove the threat, boom, right? Sound easy? Not so, right? Can you remove all the malware in the world? No, right? Can you fire all your employees? No, right? IT people, they said yes, but no, right? Because a lot of time things happen because there's users, right? The computers, because that's why usually people ask me like, what's wrong with my computer? And I said, well, how do you use it? That's usually my question to them, is because what your action on it causes it to change, right? So now, if the disgruntled employee is a threat, we dismiss that employee, right? If that employee is giving out password and they don't care, then we dismiss it. Usually they have like a system, like you would give them a warning, they have corrective actions, they would have to do more training and so on, and then you would then be able to dismiss them. Or we can mitigate the malware, okay? A lot of times now we just contain the malware. You can't really remove it because it impacts your system files. So we want to make sure that we monitor and we contain. Okay. So how many actions can you have for risk management? 4. Okay. Accept, avoid, mitigate, and remove. Mitigate is just to kind of reduce it down to something that we can tolerate. Remove is to get rid of it completely. Okay, that's the difference. A lot of the time people think that this is the same as this. No, this is 0. This is like maybe 5-10%. Some. Okay. For 11, it says, okay, let me swing back to the notes and kind of show you where we're at. So the processes, this is from I think one of the textbook, the textbook I was referring to, and then it gives you the steps so you can refer to the image. We talked about that, right? We talked about the types of threats. Okay. The matrix we use is similar to that. And then the control. So here it shows you how you can have NAC, or network access control, where we would implement like multi-factor authentication. So you would have an authenticator, and then this is for remote access. So you would have this for the remote media server. So you can control some of that for remote access. You can use agent-based, which is software for the system, or you can have agentless that doesn't require software. So, I know some of you are remote workers, right? Some remote workers, they need to authenticate to their company's portal, right? And so when we say agent-based, that means that we install software on their laptop, right, that they take home and be able to control the access through that. And then you have agentless, where you just open up your browser like Chrome or Firefox or Edge, and then you go to a website, you authenticate to that website, and it's gonna, once it authenticates you, it gives you access to the bring you past the firewall. So remember that when we're entering from the cloud, the first thing on the network that we're gonna see is the border firewall, right? That's kind of like the protection to your mansion, right? And then once we pass through that, it's going to take us to the area where, sometimes they would put, it depends on the type of worker that is. So we would determine based on their level of access. But for most remote workers, they just need to connect to their actual computer at work. So it's going to load the desktop for their work once they have access. Okay, so it talks about in-band. So when you're using an in-band, that's dedicated appliance for the devices. And then you have out-of-band, that's just authenticated to the server that's going to grant access. So what I described through the web access, the network access through the web and authenticating through the portal, that's out-of-band, right? For the in-band, we would then authenticate to the actual device itself, to the desktop. Okay, so let's talk about let me see if we did answer those questions. Any question? Okay, so an example of an in-band is we would use a device, which is a firewall. So you would log in and authenticate, and then the firewall is gonna permit you to enter, or you can go through the captive portal. So if you remote work and you log in through a captive portal, you're using an in-band. Let me take 11 down to the next page. Are we okay with that? I know I'm running a little bit behind time. So okay. So next we're gonna talk a little bit about firewall. So we know that firewall is gonna allow us to control what's coming in, what's coming out, what's happening inside our network. It is a way that we can, allow and deny certain activity or connection. So in the network perimeter that's around the company, right, around our systems in our company, the infrastructure, we want to have inbound and outbound control. So it's like we want to be able to monitor what's coming in and out. We want to use firewall for that. We can also use firewall to protect your web because there might be a lot of connection requests to our web server, especially if we are like an e-commerce website or a company that does online retail. Or in general, when you have a website up, you're going to expect a lot of people to visit if it's interesting. And we might have application server to be able to support our organization or our customer. So what we can do is we can put it in a demilitarized zone, which is an area before your private network, right? So with that, you're going to have firewall at the edge of that, right? And a firewall at the edge of your private network. The firewall for the DMZ, it's going to take a look at your web and your application because that's public front. It's facing the public. That's how people are going to access it. So for example, when you visit things like T-Mobile.com, bankofamerica.com, right? You're visiting the web server. And so let's say that you download their app, right? You're trying to do your banking, you're using an application. So ultimately it needs to connect to the web, to the application server and the database server. So those entities, right, is in the DMZ. Okay, I'll swing back to the notes and we'll take a look at like the diagram. So what we can do is we are going to restrict access to sensitive data. The data that we put into the public front is not sensitive data. Public data like who are we as a company, right? What do we sell? What kind of products we create or design? Maybe some of the contact information for our employee or our sales department. But our customer transactional data, like credit card information, that's not going to sit at the database in the public area. It's going to be inside the private network. So that means that whenever that you submit the transaction, it's going to bring in, pass through the firewall, bring inside to the private network. The database of your customer is inside, right? And this is when you'll be able to, but then that transaction information needs to connect to other things so that way you would have like payments from Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and so on. This is why most company, if you look at like, if you go to the store and you swipe your card, right? That the internal company don't own that device. They actually contracted out a company that maintain the device in the data because they have to go through PCI DSS regulation and all the regulations on how they maintain your transaction data.
companies as big as Amazon, they do maintain it themselves, right? Because when you process things like that online, they have transactional information, but a lot of the other companies, you would see that, so grocery stores, supermarkets, retail stores, they contract it out. You go to Costco, you go to Walmart, all of that data is actually, maintained by another entity. And then it's linked back to Walmart database, so because Walmart has an app where you can, things like, I don't know, Target does too, right? I always check out their apps and because the way I look at it is I look at it from the back. Where's your data sit and how does it maintain it? So things like look at like how many purchases you have, and then they might give you like points so that way you can come back. So it's a marketing tactic. But ultimately, there are, how you would be able to restrict that. But so you really need to map your data, right? Your sensitive data, where it goes, and how you should protect it. We'll talk about data classification later. Okay, so the endpoint security. What are endpoint systems? Laptop, tablets, desktop, smartphones, IoT devices, smart car. Now we have a lot of even robotic systems. Anything that is a system that's connecting part of your network as an ending system, right? It's not connected to other systems beyond that. So, the endpoint security, what do you need to do? Number one, you need to make sure that there's hardening policy or implementation of system hardening. So you need to make sure that you have group policy. In Windows, that's easy. You can do GPO, right? You guys seen that? So we can set up the privileges on how that system is able to access the rest of the resources on the network, like applications, or even things like, I know that if you guys try on some of the desktop, I don't know if they implemented that here, but like changing clock, right? Like your system tray right here. A lot of the system admin, they don't like you to tweak that because it changes their update push and other things, because synchronization is important in our environment. So things like you cannot change the time on your system. So that means that it's privileged. So anything that pertains to system settings, that's privileged. Anything that pertains to file, it pertains to permission, right? So we want to make sure we have access control, so least privilege, the least that you need to be able to operate. And then we want to use security software. So security software is very intuitive now. I love my security software. It actually does everything for me. It optimizes my drive. It checks. It even checks to see if and then I can get on VPN with it. So host-based firewall is one of the area, and you can use like the all-in-one anti-malware / other things security software. Question. Okay. 14. Earlier I mentioned that reverse engineering is important in this world. Like if you want to assess, could be hardware devices or a certain type of system engineering or manufacturing type of system, or even malware, sometimes you have to reverse engineer. Okay. There are security companies, right, or anti-malware companies, they specialize in reverse engineering malware. You know that there's only about 50% malware being contained or detected in the wild. That means just the internet. So whenever that we have new type of threat, right? How do they update the definitions and the signature of that threat is to reverse engineer it. Yes, you can sandbox it. Someone had said that earlier. You have to make sure that it's in a contained environment. So reverse engineer is just a technique to work backwards from the final product. Malware is just a code, a program. So a lot of the time, who knows how to reverse engineer malware? Anybody interested in working in the area? So if I have a program, how do I go back? If I, let's say that that program is built, right? And they, malware is run, it's constructed to do something malicious on your computer. So how do I listen to this? If it's built, usually it's compiled, right? A lot of times it's C++ or some C-based language. So you uncompile it, okay? You have to get it to the bin file, the binary level. That's how you need to reverse engineer. So let's say that you have a car, right? My analogy for this is a built car. But this car is malicious. You want to know, how it's designed. You have to break it down. So you have to unbuild the car. You have to unbuild the malware by decompiling the application, right? How do you do that? You would use an IDE, an IDE with a compiler. So it's Java, and there's some malicious files created Java or Python, right? You have to unbuild it. Then you would go through, right? You would analyze, so looking at the bin file, be able to examine it. And so sometimes they would look at it at the low level or even at the address level. So this is when your programming and software engineering knowledge is handy. So because a lot of students ask me like, how can I use this in cybersecurity, right? In a lot of ways. Okay. So having programming knowledge is useful. Okay, so you have to get back from the finished product to the beginning. And this is where you see how it works. Okay. So you sandbox it. Okay. You can also fingerprint the software. You would also look at the hardware, decompile the application to the binary and the source code. Okay. So I think this question is here now, right? There's a lot of emphasis now. There's a lot of buzz about ML and AI in cybersecurity. It's not very common, truly, right? It's gradually becoming more of a practice. So the future for cybersecurity analysis is to be able to implement machine learning. ML stands for machine learning algorithm. To be able to analyze system behavior. There are companies that already have this in place, right? There are companies that are looking at integrating this. They're also buying or building, right, API that's going to be able to adapt to their existing environment. We are, when you introduce a solution, you have to make sure that it works with all your existing systems, because legacy-wise, if you just throw things in there and it doesn't work with your appliances or the product that you carry, what's going to happen is you are going to need that cost, you're going to lose money. Okay. So even with Cisco, right, and some of the larger organization that you see in IT and security, integrating this will take time, right? People are saying, okay, so I think in the last couple of years, you see drastic, right, improvement, advancement in artificial intelligence, and you are going to see that in the next couple of years. I say about 10 years from now, we're going to fully integrate all of this in the adaptive security practices. It might sound long, but it's because we have a lot of things that are still pretty old. Most people don't rip out their network, right? Some of the appliances probably they bought from 1990, it's still functional. Right? Most people haven't upgraded to Windows 10 even. And some of the government computers. But so yeah, so even when stop support doesn't always mean upgrade, right? Because it costs money. Any question? Okay, let's stop here. I'm gonna end the video.